Good evening. The unrelenting pressure.
Huw Edwards was, for many years, one of the BBC's most well-known newsreaders.
There are 650 MPs.
And a familiar face in homes across the UK.
Welcome to Windsor.
It's very difficult to overstate what a huge figure Huw Edwards was to the British viewing public.
Guiding the nation through some of the most significant events in recent history.
Reporting the death of Her Majesty, the Queen.
But it was all to come crashing down. In front of the cameras for the wrong reasons.
He was extremely trusted as the voice of the nation. He abused that position.
His TV career over, ending up with a criminal conviction as a registered sex offender.
Even those close to him had one view of who Huw Edwards was, which is very different from the one that's been revealed in this process.
Born in South Wales in 1961, Huw Edwards was brought up in a small village near Llanelli, landing his first broadcasting job at a commercial radio station, where he read bulletins in both English and Welsh. His first BBC job began in 1984 as a correspondent for BBC Wales. Where he also presented his first TV news bulletins. It was the beginning of his journey towards national fame.
3% nationwide in Wales of a victory for the Yes campaign.
I was very impressed by anybody who's bilingual. I thought he was modest and serious in his demeanour and a good political reporter.
He went on to present the BBC 6 o'clock news and eventually the news at 10, becoming a household name.
Tonight at 10, the latest evidence of ambulance services struggling to cope with rising demand. This will be the focus of more than 1 billion television viewers throughout the world.
And someone who talked the nation through some of the most crucial moments in recent history.
It's very difficult to overstate what a huge figure Huw Edwards was to the British viewing public. This was a man that most famously had announced the death of the Queen.
This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
He was the man that was there, that guided us through these moments of real national significance, and he was a fixture on our screens for many, many years.
But away from the spotlight, there was a private life which remained unseen, one which would eventually be out in the open, and the trusted newsreader became the story. In July 2023, a report by The Sun alleged that a high-profile BBC presenter had been involved in serious misconduct, but The Sun did not name Edwards.
Allegations tonight concerning a BBC presenter accused of paying a teenager for sexually explicit photographs beginning when they were 17. The claims in the Sun newspaper allege the unnamed male presenter paid the teenager tens of thousands of pounds.
The family of that young person said that they had been using that money, taking that money and using it to fund a drug habit.
A family came to us extremely concerned about their child, who was 17 at the time when the contact with Edwards first started. And their incredible frustration was that they'd been to complain to the BBC about Edwards' behaviour. They felt they were turned away, not listened to. They'd also spoken to the police, who were unhelpful, and they literally felt they had nowhere else left to go. Their child was taking Class A drugs and had so many issues around that, and they were concerned for his welfare. He'd been in and out of hospitals, and they just wanted the money to stop.
They say that they complained to the BBC about the presenter's behaviour in May, and the allegation is that the BBC didn't properly investigate it.
The parents gave us some evidence as well. We saw bank statements, we saw text messages, WhatsApps, MSN, all different kinds of messages. So we knew the story was true.
The Sun, I think, was very careful in what it did. It didn't identify the presenter, it didn't identify the gender of the person who had supposedly had some kind of improper contact with the presenter. And I have to say, it did not cross my mind at the time that the person involved could have been Huw.
Everybody wanted to know who it was. Now, we hadn't named him, and we hadn't named the young person at the heart of it. We didn't even say what gender they were, because we were mindful of both the young, I can now say, young boy's privacy and Edward's privacy.
The BBC announced they had suspended a male staff member and were working as quickly as possible to establish the facts. As the days passed, rumours spread, drawing in other BBC presenters.
Everyone in this building knows who it is. And there are an awful lot of people who you also have a duty of care to, male presenters on air, who are having to go on air to say that it's not them.
It is a very difficult and complex situation, and we're trying to calmly and judiciously navigate our way through quite difficult circumstances where, as I said, you've got to balance duty of care issues, privacy issues.
We had these very high-profile, famous individuals, the likes of Jeremy Vine, Gary Lineker, Nicky Campbell, all feeling obliged to state that they were not the individual at the heart of the allegations.
Jeremy Vine posted this on X. He said that the BBC presenter involved in the scandal should now come forward publicly, but that it was his decision and his alone. At the time, the young person themselves disputed the allegations, and detectives announced that there was no information to suggest a criminal offence had been committed.
The guns turned on us when the boy made his statement. Many people in the media used it as a stick to beat us with, but we had never once said that what had gone on between this boy and Edwards was criminal. There was a bit of a grey area, and we never said it was criminal. So that didn't surprise me that the police opened and shut that case.
The young man at the centre of the allegations would later go on to say that he felt groomed by Edwards. Soon after, Edwards' wife, Vicky Flynn, named her husband as the man at the centre of the media storm.
Tonight at 10, the news presenter Huw Edwards has been identified as the man at the centre of allegations over payments for sexually explicit images. A trusted face for millions, he's now in hospital receiving treatment for mental health issues.
Vicky Flynn issued this statement.
I am doing this primarily out of concern for his mental well-being and to protect our children. Huw is suffering from serious mental health issues. As is well documented, he has been treated for severe depression in recent years. The events of the last few days have greatly worsened matters. He has suffered another serious episode and is now receiving inpatient hospital care, where he'll stay for the foreseeable future.
If you are in a prominent position, if you are a public face, you can't say that the barrier for the bar for acceptable behaviour is that you've broken the law. I mean, a lot of people, not just in the media, but in corporate life and elsewhere, lose their jobs for behaviour well short of breaking the law.
Soon afterwards, BBC News, which report independently on the BBC, reported fresh allegations of Edwards' behaviour towards junior staff. A BBC employee has told us that they receive what they believe are inappropriate messages, that they'd received these messages on social media from the presenter.
So when other allegations emerged from the BBC about inappropriate conduct from Huw, particularly towards BBC members of staff, there was definitely fears that the BBC continued to fail to have a grip on its workplace culture and duty of care.
The BBC said it was continuing its own investigation. Then, in April 2024, the newsreader's career at the BBC officially came to an end.
The former presenter of this programme, Huw Edwards, has resigned from the BBC, saying he was leaving on the basis of medical advice from his doctors.
In the period he was suspended, he still received his salary of more than £435,000 a year. And then, in July 2024, the Metropolitan Police made a shocking announcement.
The Former BBC presenter Huw Edwards has been charged with 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
I remember I came in here on a Monday morning and the news editor came running in saying, "We think Edwards has been charged." But what was even more of a shock was the nature of those charges. First, we had the name Huw Edwards. We checked on the court documents. We had to prove it was the same person. And when we saw the detail of those charges, I was staggered.
Making an indecent image is effectively the creation of an indecent image of a child. This also extends further in terms of the accessing, viewing, sharing and distribution of such images. Every time that image is viewed, circulated and distributed again and again and again, leads to re-victimise that child and continue that level of abuse.
Some of the charges involved Category A images.
They can be categorised into A, B and C, with A being the most serious images, the most severe images, which involve sexual penetrative activity.
In July 2024, Edwards appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court.
The seriousness of the crimes that the Met announced were shocking in the extreme and really, really surprised a lot of people in the industry.
Huw Edwards pleaded guilty.
Good evening. The former BBC News presenter Huw Edwards has pleaded guilty to accessing indecent images of children as young as 7 after he was sent hundreds of sexual images on WhatsApp by a man he met online. Westminster Magistrates Court was told that 41 of them were indecent images of children.
He obviously knew that there was evidence there, so I think he almost certainly did the sensible thing. He's clearly spared himself the possibility of a drawn-out and embarrassing trial, which I would have thought that nobody, either his former employers or he, would have wanted.
It emerged that he had been arrested in November 2023, 7 months before, after police discovered his involvement in a WhatsApp chat with a man called Alex Williams dating back to 2020. Williams started to send the BBC staff photos and videos. Over 16 months, Edwards was sent 377 images, including illegal ones. The court heard the former newsreader kept on messaging Williams, even when Williams sent him underage pictures and Edwards had asked him to stop. His lawyer said there was no suggestion Edwards had created any images or sent them to anyone.
Newsnight can reveal that the BBC knew back in November that the investigation into one of their highest paid talents related to child abuse images, and they still paid him his salary.
When it realised its star presenter had been arrested, should he have been sacked? Because between the point where he was arrested and his resignation, he was paid more than £200,000, public money, a salary which increased by £40,000 last year.
Why also did they let him leave on his own terms? If you remember, he resigned from the BBC in April. He said on the medical advice of doctors. The BBC certainly didn't give him a fulsome send-off. Clearly, the BBC was trying to balance its duties as an employer of Huw Edwards, those duties of care that they have. But now that we know these facts, the decision does look reputationally very difficult for the BBC.
The BBC's David Sillitoe interviewed Director General Tim Davie.
Yesterday, the BBC said it was shocked, but you knew about this in November of last year when Huw Edwards was arrested. You knew it related to child abuse, and you didn't sack him. Why?
Well, we were very shocked, and that's the first thing I want to say, which is no one knew about the specifics of what we heard over the last few days, which has been deeply disturbing. Now, when it comes to the decision that we made in November, when we were obviously faced with, I think, a very difficult decision, actually, and we considered it very carefully. The police came to us and gave us information that they had arrested Mr. Edwards, but they wanted to be assured of total confidence. And the reason they rang us at that point was to ensure that, and it's a technical process, which is to ensure employees are protected.
You're worried about the welfare of Huw Edwards. What about the welfare of the children?
Well, we're absolutely, the primary thoughts here are always for victims of these terrible situations. And
so why not just sack him?
Because, quite simply, the police came to us and said, look, we need to do our work in total confidence.
It would have been still confidential and you could have sacked him.
I think you're then into a different argument, which is it fair to sack someone, and is the right action at that?
You had a raft of complaints about him. You had the Sun story and you had this.
When the police, and I put, you know, if you think about this in terms of precedent, people do get arrested, and then we've had situations where no charges and there's nothing there to be followed up on. In this case, we knew it was serious. We knew no specifics, by the way.
I think one can understand the BBC management doing that from the point of view of managers, but one can also understand that it looks incredibly awkward to the general public once you know someone's facing very serious charges to go on paying them. So I think that was probably a mistake, although I fully accept that there might have been quite complex legal advice around going ahead with it.
The BBC asked Edwards to hand back the £200,000 he had earned since he was suspended. In September 2024, Huw Edwards appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court for sentencing.
The court's been hearing that Huw Edwards paid another man, Alex Williams, hundreds of pounds for gifts and presents in exchange for these images. We also heard the prosecution talking through some of the exchanges on the WhatsApp messages that were shared between Edwards and Williams.
The prosecutor said that Williams offered to send naughty and young images, to which Edwards replied, "Go on." Edwards had also described some of the indecent images as amazing. In his sentencing remarks, Chief Magistrate Paul Goldspring noted that Edwards had no previous convictions, had voluntarily stopped receiving the images, had shown remorse and had a mental disorder. He was sentenced to a 6-month jail sentence, suspended for 2 years, and was placed on the sex offenders register for 7 years. The BBC released a statement saying, "We are appalled by his crimes. He has betrayed not just the BBC, but audiences who put their trust in him."
It's a very tragic downfall at the end of the day for an individual who was one of the most famous, if not most liked, individuals in the country.
Obviously the nature of the complaints that we had were slightly different to and less horrific than the ones that he's actually been found guilty of. But clearly we established, with our original story, helped establish a pattern of behaviour. I think he's a predator and an abuser, and he was using his power and influence and trust.
It appears that his living separately from his wife and children now, even those close to him had one view of who Huw Edwards was, which is very different from the one that's been revealed in this process.
This is not a victimless crime. Behind every image is a vulnerable child that has been exploited and has been abused.
If you have been affected by some of the issues raised in this film, details of help and support are available at bbc.co.uk/actionline.